Okay, we're starting our business law video series. And I kind of went through, because since business law is such a huge topic, there's so much to cover, I went through and tried to select some things that I think are the most important for your age group, right? You're going to be starting to work soon. If you are going forward with entrepreneurship, you'll eventually be hiring and managing employees. So I selected some topics that I think are very important for you to know that can protect you as you start to get involved in the workforce. It's stuff I wish I learned when I was in high school and before I started working. But yeah, hopefully what you learn here can help you in the future. So the first thing I'm going to talk about before we actually get into any business law is just talk about the general hierarchy of law in Canada. Because not all laws are created equal. So there's three main types of laws that'll fit into this hierarchy. We have at the very top, the most important laws that we have that govern pretty much anything else in Canada is called constitutional law. And this outlines the structures and the powers of government, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then underneath constitutional law, we have statute law. And statutes are any kind of laws or acts that are passed by governments, whether it's the federal government, whether it's the provincial government. And then lastly, we have common law. And common law is any sort of decisions that are made by judges in previous cases. So if a judge is in a hearing, in a trial, and that judge makes a decision, that decision becomes law. And other judges in the future have to follow that same decision. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. So let's delve a little bit more into constitutional law. Constitutional law, like I said, outlines the structure and powers of government. Our Constitution is comprised of two different parts. The Constitution Act, which was first written in 1867 when Canada became its own independent country, and it was amended in 1982. And one of the biggest things in 1982 that they added was the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You've probably heard of that before. So we'll talk about both of those two documents. So in the Constitution Act, it outlines that the Constitution, these two documents, are the supreme law of Canada, meaning that every other law has to follow what the Constitution says. Any other law that is in contradiction of the Constitution is invalid, essentially. So in the Constitution Act, 1982, it divides powers between federal and provincial governments, right? What is the federal government in charge of? And then what are our provincial governments in charge of? And you can see on screen there just a few of those powers and how they're divided. So some of the main parts: federal government is in charge of national defense, so the military, foreign policy, our postal services, our banking systems, and I think still as of right now, telecommunications, which I think they are changing that to provincial, but I don't think that's happened yet. But what are the provincial governments in charge of? Well, they're things like healthcare, education, highways, and a lot more, but these are some of the main ones. So where does this come from? Why do we have BC healthcare? Why do, like, for example, teachers have to go through the BC Ministry of Education? Well, it's because provincial governments have that jurisdiction. So let's talk about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for a second, because this will come in our next video on human rights. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms essentially grants us a whole bunch of freedoms and rights to all Canadian citizens, and some of these also to those residing in Canada, even if they aren't Canadian citizens yet. So we have some fundamental freedoms. Again, these are just an overview. There's a whole lot more in the charter, but here are some of the main ones. So fundamental freedoms, we have freedom of religion, expression, peaceful assembly and association. We won't be talking too much about fundamental rights in this course, because again, we're going to be focusing on our business law, and really the only part of the charter that will apply to us is equality, which we see there: equality, freedom from discrimination. But the Charter also gives us democratic rights such as voting, being able to stand for election, mobility freedom, so being able to leave, enter, remain in Canada, and for Canadian citizens, work in all of Canada, right? So even if I'm born in BC, I can move to Ontario and work if I want to. That's a right that this Charter gives us. There's legal rights such as the right to life, liberty, security of the person, right to be secure against unreasonable search or seizure, and we also have our official languages in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, English and French, and we have the right to be educated in either of those languages. So if you wanted to be solely educated in French, even in British Columbia, you have that right. Next, we're going to talk about statute law. And again, these are laws or acts that are passed by governments, whether it's federal or provincial. And you'll hear the word legislation. That's what this means. So if you go to Parliament in Ottawa or our Legislative Assembly in Victoria, in BC here, that's where our governments will try to, they have bills, they try to get bills through Parliament and Legislative Assembly, and once those bills become acts, they get written into law. So that's that word legislation. And then we have common law. Like I said, common law is essentially just decisions made by judges in previous cases. And it's built around this whole concept called stare decisis, which is Latin for let the decision stand, or that which has been decided. So, like I said, if a judge makes a ruling in one case, other judges have to follow that same ruling. The only way that something in common law can get thrown out is if there is a statute that says something different, or again, constitutional law. That's where we see that hierarchy.